I think the new atheists are wrong about their materialism. And it was very interesting. I came across this quote from the agnostic philosopher Anthony Kenny recently, writing in the Times. He just dropped this comment into the middle of a book review that he was doing there. He said, "There are signs that naturalism is collapsing under its own weight." It's quite a surprising quotation to find in the Times from a well-known knighted philosopher of the realm.
Knighted philosopher of the realm. Could that possibly be more of an appeal to authority? I need something of slightly more substance, which I'm sure you'll now lead into. Greetings and welcome there, people of YouTube. This is Essence of Thought here, continuing with my dismantling of Peter S. Williams' lecture given at the University of Surrey. With that said, let us continue.
Gary Habermas says that just as idealism gave way to naturalism earlier in the 20th century, that was the worldview that dominated academic philosophy before naturalism did. He says naturalism may now be losing its position of supremacy as a worldview. The atheist philosopher Quentin Smith, a few years ago, wrote an article highlighting what he called the influx of talented theists into philosophy departments in the States. And he lamented in this article, he said, academia has now lost its mainstream secularization. If naturalism is the true worldview and a dark age means an age where the vast majority of philosophers and scientists do not know the true worldview, then we have to admit we are living in a dark age. One sign of this dark age from the Quentin viewpoint, as Habermas points out, is the current revival of theistic arguments within philosophy of religion and science. And just put a selection of recent books up there. The last half century has witnessed a remarkable resurgence of interest in natural theology, says William Lane Craig. Alvin Plantinga, recently retired from Notre Dame University, probably the top philosopher of religion in the world, says there are a number of reasonably strong arguments for the existence of God, and I'd certainly go along with that. But perhaps a little less obvious as a publishing phenomenon is what I call the other publishing phenomena. Books like these, published in the last decade by leading atheist and agnostic and non-Christian philosophers and thinkers, questioning, or at least raising problems with elements of a naturalistic worldview. Books like Anthony Flou's There Is a God, or Thomas Nagel's Mind and Cosmos, or Bradley Monton's Seeking God in Science, or Hume's Abject Failure by John Ehrman, and so on. Flou's an interesting case in point. This is from an interview he gave just around the time that his book detailing his about turn of mind came out. And he said in that interview, the more that was discovered about the richness and inherent intelligence of life, the less it seemed likely that a chemical soup could just magically generate the genetic code. The best confirmation of this radical gulf is Richard Dawkins' comical effort to argue in The God Delusion that the origin of life can be attributed to a lucky chance. If that's the best argument you have, then the game's over. Two noted philosophers, one an agnostic, Anthony Kenny, who we just quoted earlier, and the other an atheist, Thomas Nagel, recently pointed out that Dawkins has failed to address three major issues that ground the rational case for God. And as it happens, these are the very same issues that have driven me to accept the existence of a God. The laws of nature, life with its teleological organization, and the existence of the universe.
That, my friend, is the first hint of argument in over 3 minutes and 25 seconds of you talking. Everything up to that point has purely been a case of person X said Y, which doesn't mean anything other than new media and the advancement of old media has made it so that these ideas that may not have reached such a wide audience and thus have had less of an impact otherwise, do in fact reach more people. This coupled with the fact that non-belief is no longer a criminal offence in the West as it was before, and then becoming a socially unacceptable view, and then an offence once again during the Cold War as a symptom of communism, means that atheists can and have started to speak out about things, and this naturally causes the opposition to also raise their voice. This alone has no weight on anything. The whole world could declare the mountains non-existent, yet this would have no weight on reality, as all it would take is one man to prove they exist. Sadly, we're waiting for such evidence on your God. Flashing out names and quotes without basis and elaboration is merely multiplying sources beyond necessity, and could be labelled as a fallacy of excessive footnotes. Overall, this is more showmanship than well-constructed argument.
It's interesting to see by parallel Bradley Monton, although he remains an atheist, nevertheless saying in his book Seeking God in Science, an argument that starts from fine-tuning of the fundamental constants, an argument based on the fact that the universe began to exist, and an argument based on the improbability of the naturalistic origin of life from non-life, are all somewhat plausible. Let's just think briefly about the kind of arguments that swirl around these topics. Think about the implications of contemporary cosmology. So Bradley Monton again says, if the universe had a beginning, then that lends support to what's called the Kalam cosmological argument. But at the conference a couple of years ago, celebrating Stephen Hawking's 70th birthday, the well-known atheist cosmologist Alexander Vilenkin went so far as to say this in a lecture he gave at that conference. He said, all of the evidence we have says that the universe had a beginning. Not the preponderance of the evidence that we have says on balance that the universe had a beginning, but all the evidence we have says the universe had a beginning.
And your point would be what? The universe having a beginning is a required step of the KCA, yet that does not mean that the KCA is the only route from here. The KCA is fully reliant upon the universe having a beginning, not the other way round. Another note is that the KCA is also reliant on the A theory of time, which is not all that well regarded in the scientific community. One reason for this is that Einstein's theory of relativity points to the B theory of time. But of course, this fact was entirely skipped over in William's lecture. So, to reiterate, it does lend support to the KCA in offering a singular required element, yet there are better alternatives to the KCA which do not conflict with other elements of science.
And in the editorial of New Scientist, not known as a bastion of supernatural views, reporting on that conference, the editorial in New Scientist from 14th of January 2012 said this: the Big Bang is now part of the furniture of modern cosmology. But many physicists have been fighting a rearguard action against it for decades, largely because of the theological overtones. If you have an instant of creation, don't you need a creator? Cosmologists thought they had a workaround. Over the years, they've tried on several different models of the universe that dodge the need for a beginning whilst still requiring a Big Bang. An illustration of how one might do that, for example, oscillating universe models. You say, yes, there was a Big Bang, but there was a previous Big Bang to that. So there was an expansion and a contraction, and then an expansion, and there'll be another. And we have a sort of oscillating universe model, for example, although those have now been ditched. As New Scientist says, but recent research has shot them full of holes. It now seems certain that the universe did have a beginning. Without an escape clause, physicists and philosophers must finally answer a problem that's been nagging at them for the best part of 50 years. How do you get a universe, complete with the laws of physics, out of nothing? And by nothing there, you have to mean nothing and not what Lawrence Krauss means by nothing.
You merely dismiss Krauss's concept of nothing as it does not fit within your goal, and yet you expect those you are presenting to, the students, to accept every quote you have mined. One thing that you did forget to mention is the fact that, no, New Scientist is not a peer-reviewed journal, but a non-peer-reviewed magazine which does allow for speculative articles. Just because it has scientist in the name doesn't instantly make it correct on everything, and even science itself thrives off making errors. The expression of discovery is not normally, "Eureka, I have it," but rather, "Oh, that's interesting." In short, this quote has a long way of going to convince me of much.
How do you get a universe complete with the laws of physics out of nothing? Well, surely the only way to get anything, or to explain anything, is to get it from something able to give it. That seems pretty straightforward. Now, nothing means non-being, not anything. So non-being can't do or give or explain anything because it isn't anything. So no physical reality can explain the existence of all physical reality. That would be a self-contradictory concept. So having eliminated non-being and physical being as potential explanations of the being of the physical universe, the only remaining possibility is non-physical being, i.e. some sort of supernatural being. Think of it like this. Let's do it through in premises. Modern cosmology tells us what some Christian and Islamic philosophers had argued on mathematical, cosmological basis for a long time, but have now joined with them in saying there was a beginning. There was a first physical event. If you trace the chain of physical events backwards in time, in the TARDIS, you would, as it were, get to a day where there was no previous day worth of time, an hour before which there was no previous hour worth of time, and so on. As Alexander Vilenkin, we quoted, says, all the evidence we have says that the universe had a beginning. So there was a first physical event. Premise 2. Every physical event has a cause. Now that is not a controversial claim, except perhaps when you want to apply it to the first physical event, and people start getting jittery because they see what it implies. But certainly, relative to our experience base of reality, you would say the chances of the proposition every physical event has a cause being true is pretty high. If we were here in the lecture and we suddenly heard a gigantic bang from the corridor, and you said, "Good grief, what was that?" I said, "Well, it was a bang." "But yes, but what caused it? What happened?" I said, "Well, nothing." You'd all believe me and we'd just carry on as if, No, you would not seriously consider nothing as an answer. But those two premises jointly imply something. And just a note to swat down what I know is the favourite comeback here is to make an appeal to quantum mechanics at this stage. But as David Albert, who is an atheist philosopher of science and physicist, says, relativistic quantum field theoretical vacuum states, no less than giraffes or refrigerators or solar systems, he obviously has a wry sense of humour, this guy, says, are particular arrangements of elementary physical stuff. The fact that some arrangements of fields happen to correspond to the existence of particles and some don't is not a whit more mysterious than the fact that some of the possible arrangements of my fingers happen to correspond to the existence of a fist and some don't. And the fact that particles can pop in and out of existence over time as those fields rearrange themselves is not a whit more mysterious than the fact that fists can pop in and out of existence over time as my fingers rearrange themselves. And none of these poppings amount to anything even remotely in the neighbourhood of a creation from nothing.
Here we are, back at Krauss, with a targeted article which made every attempt possible to attack Krauss's personal credibility. Krauss challenges the very concept of nothing in the sense that the notion of nothing is not as clear as we may first think. I'll play a short video in which Krauss explains himself what he means better than I ever could, and let's just move on from there.
When you think about nothing, you have to be a little more careful than you normally are, because in fact nothing is a physical concept, because it's the absence of something, and something is a physical concept. And what we've learned over the last 100 years is that nothing is much more complicated than we would have imagined otherwise. For example, the simplest kind of nothing is the kind of nothing of the Bible, say an infinite empty space, an infinite dark void of the Bible. You know, nothing in it, no particles, no radiation, nothing. Well, that kind of nothing turns out to be full of stuff in a way, or at least much more complicated than you might have imagined, because due to the laws of quantum mechanics and relativity, we now know that empty space is a boiling, bubbling brew of virtual particles that are popping in and out of existence at every moment. And in fact, for that kind of nothing, if you wait long enough, you're guaranteed by the laws of quantum mechanics to produce something. So the difference between empty space with stuff in it and empty space with nothing in it is not that great anymore. In fact, they're different versions of the same thing. So the transition from nothing to something is not so surprising. Now you might say, well, that's not good enough because you have space. Where did the space come from? Well, a more demanding definition of nothing is no space. But in fact, once you apply the laws of quantum mechanics to gravity itself, then space itself becomes a quantum mechanical variable and fluctuates in and out of existence. And you can literally, by the laws of quantum mechanics, create universes, create spaces and times where there was no space and time before. So now you've got no particles, no radiation, no space, no time. That sounds like nothing. But then you might say, well, you know what? You got the laws of physics. You got the laws of nature. The laws themselves are somehow something, although I would argue, in fact, that that is not at all obvious or clear or necessary. But even there, it turns out physics potentially has an answer. Because we now have good reason to believe that even the laws of physics themselves are kind of arbitrary. There may be an infinite number of universes, and in each universe that's being created, the laws of physics are different. It's completely random. And the laws themselves come into existence when the universe comes into existence. So there's no pre-existing fundamental law. Anything that can happen does happen. And therefore you got no laws, no space, no time, no particles, no radiation. That's a pretty good definition of nothing.
So there was a first physical event. Every physical event has a cause. Therefore, the first physical event had a cause. But if the first physical event had a cause, the cause of the first physical event can't itself have been a physical cause. You can't say, what caused the first physical cause? Well, it was the previous physical event. Makes no sense. From which it follows that, therefore, the first physical event had a non-physical cause. As the philosopher Dallas Willard puts it, the dependent character of all physical states, together with the completeness of the series of any dependencies underlying the existence of any given physical state, logically implies at least one self-existent and therefore non-physical state of being.
Well, as noted, the KCA has been around for a reasonable amount of time and has been rendered apart repeatedly as a result. I'll be keeping a tally of the points which are damaging to the KCA in the corner as I go along, starting off at 1 due to the fact already mentioned around the KCA's reliance upon the A theory of time. So let us now deal with the equivocation fallacy that occurs in this argument. Hopefully, many of us are aware of the laws of causality, i.e., that every event is the result of a primer, an agent. The problem is that we often oversimplify and misrepresent what is actually occurring. When agents, i.e., us in this case, cause something to happen or create something, all we are merely doing is reshaping pre-existing matter and transferring energy between states. Nowhere does causation even touch upon the formation of matter and energy, as it dictates the behavior of said matter and energy once it exists and cannot be applied to an existence without these things. It would be the same as trying to apply the laws of sound to a complete vacuum. It just doesn't work, as there are no particles to transmit said sound through vibration. Just as this revelation would ruin any number of sci-fi movies, the acknowledgement that causation does not necessarily apply prior the universe ruins the theist fantasy behind this argument. Thus, the assertion that the universe as the first physical event cannot be uncaused is false, for the fact that it's only the first physical event in the way that it allows for the physical laws we know to exist. Building on from this, I may just as equally assert that the universe existed via its own devices as you may assert that your God existed via his own devices. Any rejection of this would be drawing upon an appeal of special pleading, without considering the fact that you claim the universe cannot exist on its own, yet an infinitely more powerful universe-creating machine can. At the moment, it may seem that we have reached a stalemate, with both of us asserting that something has the capability to exist on its own, yet we both disagree as to what. That is until you realize that the KCA does not follow at this point. A deity existing does not bridge the gap automatically to the universe existing. To overcome this gap, the theist must build extra assertions, i.e., that this God would be capable of creating the universe, and that it is his will to create the universe. These are assertions based only on groundless speculation, not logical deduction. The problem is that the KCA does not solve the original issue as knowledge should, in that it does not solve the question of fundamental causes, since it simply declares a God model based on timeless action. This is also interesting in that it would seem to temporarily switch to a state of agreement with cosmologists in the fact that there was a certain point in time before which the laws of nature did not apply as they do now. Yet clearly, in your mind, that only works for your God. Even if you were to drag out the claims of Krauss on what existed prior to the universe, at least quantum mechanics has been proven to exist. It is observable. Beyond that, its potential power is unlimited, just as the chances for the formation of the universe in a place without time are unlimited. So overall, the KCA is assumption reliant and fails to fix the issue, and therefore falls victim to Occam's razor and other criterions for knowledge due to multiplying assumptions beyond necessity. For the Kalam cosmological argument to overcome the Occam's cosmological argument, the theist must prove the character and the capability of God, but to do so they must first prove the existence of said God, rendering the Kalam cosmological argument completely useless, in that it requires the existence of God to be proven prior to using it to prove the existence of God, at which point you may as well just throw it away. But that's not it. There are yet more issues with the KCA. This particular one was devised by a friend of mine who goes by the username CheekyVimto08 and was the very one I chased you with during the Q&A. The Theistic argument against apologetics. If the KCA is the knockdown argument for God that you say, then why does he not just show himself? The moment that you claim this argument works conclusively, Christians and Muslims can no longer hide behind the argument that God allows for reasonable doubt. If you had instead claimed it as merely plausible or likely, then you wouldn't have this issue. However, in attempting to get rid of any alternative, such as with Krauss's alternative, you have indeed cut yourself off. The three conclusions that could come from this supposed knockdown argument are: A. You are far smarter than that which you define as being the most intelligent being in existence. B. God did create the universe, but doesn't care about humanity, i.e. the deist perspective. Or C. There's a flaw in your argument. This is the effect of you bashing Krauss's alternative and asserting the KCA as a definitive argument for God. It has quartered any counter-argument you could have ever had in response to the issue of divine hiddenness between the four horses of logic, reason, analysis, and sound conclusion that all reject this rampant cognitive dissonance displayed on your part. The KCA also fails on the basis that the explanation is so easy to vary, i.e. the properties of God are not argued for well, and there is no reason to prefer any particular explanation over another. On top of this, there's nothing to tie it down and analyze what we would expect to see in the way of how God made the universe. Scientific models, on the other hand, can be tested and pitted against the evidence and may be falsified. They cannot merely be edited with ad hoc response. Saying God did it as an explanation to the existence of the universe goes on to explain nothing. Rather, it merely inflicts the wizard fallacy in that I could just interchange God with anything. That is, unless you take a literal reading of Genesis, and in it the God of the Bible gets so much wrong, from the solid firmament of the sky to the moon being a light source of its own rather than a reflective surface. Either way, you lose due to obscurity or clear inaccuracy. Lastly, we go back to Krauss and question your idea of nothing from which something came. Krauss gave an actual description of nothing in lacking matter, energy, gravity, and the laws of physics themselves, i.e. everything we experience. The KCA, however, is fully reliant upon keeping the term nothing as an ambiguous one outside the realm of thought, just like infinity. The KCA needs to operationalize what it is the theist means by nothing, without merely going, and not the quantum nothingness that people such as Krauss discuss, as this goes to no length in defining what the believer means. You may just say, nothing means nothing. Yet, isn't God by your definition everything, and thus something? Maybe just think about it. So in closing, the KCA is so riddled with holes that it sinks in modern academia as a rejected argument only spun by those incapable of moving forward and progressing on arguments and their clear flaws. It fails to impress any but the philosophically illiterate or the believer seeking to root his beliefs in what from a distance seems to be a sturdy argument, but upon closer inspection is found to be a derelict ruin. So I must thank you for watching. This is the end of the fourth segment of my series taking apart Peter S. Williams' apologetics. I hope you have enjoyed watching. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe if you haven't already. This is Essence of Thought. Out.